Last time in my journey through the Suikoden series, I wound up seriously let down by Suikoden 3. Though its story started off great, it never managed to fulfill all the potential I saw in Chapter 1. Couple that with so many changes for the worse to the core gameplay, and you've got a title that I was so downright furious with by the end that I almost didn't do the video at all.
My heart bleeds for you, honey.
I'd like to play coy and pretend as if I had any hope that Suikoden 4 righted the ship, but I've seen the review scores and read what hardcore fans think of this one. Most of the contention was over whether or not it was the worst in the whole series, or if it was only the worst mainline Suikoden game.
Are you excited?
I yearn for the sweet embrace of the grave.
Fantastic!
Released in 2004 in Japan, and the next year for North America, and hey, PAL Territory's got the game this time.
Oh dear.
Suikoden 4 was brought to us by an almost entirely new team at Konami's Tokyo studio. Series creator Yoshitaka Murayama parted ways with Konami roughly a month before Suikoden 3's Japanese release to found his own company, Blue Moon Studio. Incidentally, this led to Murayama and those who left with him being scrubbed from the credits of 3 due to Konami's scumbag policy of removing the names of ex-employees. Left with next to none of the original staff behind a beloved series, Konami did exactly what you'd expect Konami to do. Grab an inexperienced team and give them barely 2 years to make a competitor to Final Fantasy. It amazes me that it took until Kojima left for people to finally realize Konami are greedy assholes. Now, not everyone who worked on previous Suikoden games is absent this time around. Artist Jun Saito returns to provide the pixel art loading screens which were sorely missing from 3, and Junko Kawano saw a huge promotion from character design on the original Suikoden to writer and producer of Suikoden 4 thanks to her work on 2001's Shadow of Destiny, a game which was also the most relevant credit that I could find for both project lead Masayuki Sarata and lead programmer Tadayuki Kobayashi. Adventure games aren't really the same thing as a proper RPG, but there's enough overlap with both being narratively driven genres that I can see experience with one aiding in the creation of the other. At the same time though, my only familiarity with Shadow of Destiny comes from the old Retsupre series riffing on it, and that was 10 years ago? I've done nothing with my life. So I have zero clue as to the actual quality of Shadow of Destiny, or if this connection is a good or bad sign for Suikoden 4. Obviously it didn't result in good reviews, but this could just as easily be part of the reason those scores weren't far worse. Point is that I should probably get myself a copy of Shadow of Destiny for a future video. Speaking of copies of games, if the graphics seem a bit more fuzzy than they were in my Suikoden 3 video, it's because I'm recording this on original hardware with my physical copy of 4. I bought this forever ago at a regional chain that doesn't even exist anymore, making it the 5th game store that went out of business after I became a regular, and I wanted to get some use out of this copy instead of buying it again off of the PS3 store. Suikoden 4 takes us 150 years prior to the first game to the open oceans far south of the Scarlet Moon Empire and the chain of islands that would come to be known as the Island Nations. Really thought long and hard on that name, didn't they? You play as, good lord, what happened to your face?
What the fuck happened to your face?
It's not just me, right? The main character's eyes are freakishly big for his face. Everyone else has a similar anime realism look going on, but he's the only one who really hits the uncanny valley for me. Those eyes just give me the giblies. Bug Eyes here is an aspirant to the Order of Knights guarding the island of Razoril. Because I suck at coming up with funny names, we'll be going with his canon name, Laszlo.
L-A-Z-L-O.
L-A-Z-L-O.
L-A-Z-L-O. Unless I was a slimer.
Having an excuse to reference an underrated cartoon may have factored in as well.
I am one with the canvas.
We start the game as Laszlo, his best friend Snow, and his other, less developed friends take their final exam to become full-fledged knights. In gameplay terms, this functions as the tutorial and your introduction to the Navy battles, which have replaced the Army battles from the last 3 games. I never had the highest opinion of the Army battles. The first games were essentially the same rock, paper, scissors system as the duels. 2 improved the Army battles, but lacked enough depth to stand up to scrutiny when compared to the strategy RPGs it was imitating, and 3's Army battles were the drizzling shits. Because of this, I wasn't exactly broken up about exchanging land warfare for rum, sodomy, and the lash. Or is that just the British naval tradition? I'm not gonna lie, there is some subtext between Laszlo and Snow. At first glance, Navy battles are a return to the strategy RPG influences of Suikoden 2, with grid-based movement and built with a clever implementation of the game's magic system. Ships are equipped with cannons powered by elemental rune magic, almost creating a Pokemon-esque type system where each shot has an element that it's weak to, and where shots of the same element cancel each other out. In theory, this creates a tense guessing game where picking the right shot at the right time is the key to survival. In practice, nearly all the Navy battles in 4 have you facing tiny numbers of enemy ships with only 2 elements, and one of the 2 always beats the other. This means that all you have to do is pick the strong element and spam that shot. Worst case scenario, you cancel each other out. Outside of the final battle, which I will credit for being a decent challenge in comparison, the only times my ships took any damage were when I deviated from this strategy or when their cannons weren't facing the attacking ship. This was the first of many things in Suikoden 4 that to me point to the game being seriously rushed. The ideas are there, but crystal clear balancing issues that were almost certainly caught by QA went unaddressed, to say nothing of the worthlessness of boarding. Boarding another ship should be one of the most exciting points in anything attempting to evoke classic swashbuckling tales. Just look at Sid Meier's Pirates, or Assassin's Creed 4, or Sid Meier's Pirates again. I like Sid Meier's Pirates. Meanwhile, boarding in Suikoden 4 plays out as a simplified version of the normal on-foot battles. You can't use items or runes, and when the battle ends, the defeated party's ship immediately sinks.
The whole ship is underwater, Captain.
Our little exam/tutorial also reintroduces us to the on-foot battle system, thankfully returning to something closer to the first 2 games instead of that frustrating pairs system introduced in 3, and duels, which were so unchanged and infrequent in 3 that I completely forgot to mention them in the video. Here, they're still mostly the same as always, but have returned to the prominence they held prior to 3, and have seen a shift towards more cinematic presentation. While there is a distinct lack of variety to the animations, get ready to see the counterattack scene a lot.
Everybody gets one.
I have to admit that this does add some extra dramatic flair to the duels. There's also been a slight change to the rock, paper, scissors meta of attack, guard, and special attack. Now, when both you and the computer pick the same option, it results in a tie where neither takes any damage. Previously, that was only the case when you picked guard for hopefully obvious reasons. Though it's small, I'm not a fan of this change. It makes it so that you only have a 1 in 3 chance of making a choice that harms your character, particularly when this is probably the easiest one to guess what the CPU is going to pick based on what your opponent says. With this being the first Suikoden game to feature voiceover, they had to cut down on the number of potential lines from your opponent in comparison to the older titles. I'll discuss the voice acting more in a little bit, but first I need to get through Act 1. Once you've graduated to full knighthood, you'll be off on your first mission alongside Snow and... I see we're going with a max party size of 4 this time around.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Though I suppose it does still technically offer one more option per turn than Suikoden 3 did. This is why the pairs system is dumb and will always be dumb. Reducing the party size by 2 shouldn't increase the number of actions I can pick per turn.
Get off my back, man!
Make sure you don't do what I did and ignore the game's subtle hints that it's important you pick the 2 you like the most. Otherwise, you'll spend a big chunk of the game with the boring dudes. The first mission goes smoothly enough that the familiar-sounding Commander Glenn...
For a captain, you lack a sense of awareness. Watch yourself. You hear me?
Fresh agency intel for you, agent.
entrusts Laszlo and Snow with guarding an important merchant on his voyage. Thanks to the power of nepotism, what with Snow's dad being the financier of Razaril's Knights, it's Snow who gets to be the captain on this super important escort mission. It has nothing to do with trying to keep his son away from any and all danger, no siree. So like you'd expect, they're promptly attacked by pirates the moment they're out of sight of Razaril. A surprise broadside rocks the ship and Snow proves his mettle by acting as if his sprained elbow is a debilitating combat wound, attempting to leave the merchant to his fate by ordering a full retreat, and flees on his own in a lifeboat the moment the crew choose to listen to Laszlo instead of him. Commander Glenn, if you would. Thank you. Fortunately, Glenn had his suspicions that something would happen and arrives in time to see how much ass Laszlo kicked with zero help from his captain, who continues to whine about his arm. Unfortunately, Brando, the leader of the pirates you defeated, decides to go out in a blaze of glory, activating the mysterious rune on his hand which atomizes everyone nearby, save for Laszlo, who is protected by a mysterious light. By the way, did I miss the explanation on that one? Initially, I assumed it was due to a true rune that Laszlo secretly possessed, but we'll see why that can't be the case in a little bit. Glenn boards the ship shortly after the explosion, with Brando on death's door. Once the pirate breathes his last, the rune he used decides to make Glenn its new host. And it must be a painful process because it doesn't just knock Glenn out, it leaves him bedridden for several days once you make it back to Rosaril. I'm just glad that there isn't a small fleet of pirates on their way to raid the island while the leader of its knights is recovering. Well, that was strange. What was that supposed to be about? Oh, we're under attack. I feel like there might have been a better way to establish that to the player than a 5-second cutscene that barely gives you time to process what you're looking at.
What the heck is that?
It's the plot development alarm!
Once Laszlo and the competent knights manage to push back the pirates' vanguard, Snow, who has become a laughingstock among the knights, tries to make up for his cowardice by ordering his new crew to chase after the retreating ships without waiting for backup. I'd say someone needs to smack him upside the head, but in the time it took me to say that, Glenn already punched him again. Gotta hand it to Suikoden 4. It's not often you see the annoying idiot character get repeatedly socked in the jaw for being an annoying idiot. Usually games expect you to find characters like Snow endearing. It's a refreshing change of pace.
Oh, you goddamn wanker! You punched me in the... Oh, you did it again!
Too bad that this is the start of a Suikoden game, so that means shit is about to hit the fan soon. As the enemy fleet approaches, Glenn ominously orders that nobody be allowed inside the fort until the battle is over. But with the enemy already at the gates, none of the knights have time to question the order. Sure enough, right when it seems that Rosaril is going to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, Glenn unleashes the power of the cursed rune he now holds to devastate the armada bearing down on his island. While everyone else breathes a sigh of relief, both we the player and Laszlo knows that Commander Glenn may have just sacrificed his life to save the day. And to the surprise of no one, Snow apparently ducked back inside during the battle. Oh, I swear if that little dumbass gets a rune that strong... Phew. Nobody's up here but Glenn and Laszlo. Oh shit, nobody's up here but Glenn and Laszlo. Guess we're getting an evil true rune this time.
What is it?
Commander Glenn is dead. He collapsed right in front of me. And then he vanished.
What?
It was him. He did it to the commander.
Yeah, sure. They'll totally believe the guy who claimed his arm was so hurt that he couldn't fight, but was perfectly capable of rowing himself to safety. Oh, they did. But why, though? What do they think happened? Laszlo walked up there, disintegrated the commander, and then passed out?
Wow, you guys are good. I'm the last person I would have suspected, but I was looking for me all the time. It's the perfect crime.
I get why Snow's dad is pushing for this, obviously. Can't have anyone showing up his precious baby boy. But why does everyone else go along with this when they've shown Snow nothing but scorn? Because the plot wouldn't happen if they didn't believe Snow isn't an actual answer, smartass. Also, you like this black screen? This isn't the game bugging out. More than once, Suikoden 4 has major story dialogue play out in front of a blank screen. The lack of voiceover makes it extra eerie when you're playing it for the first time.
I've been so lonely in here. Such terrible thoughts one has, alone, in the dark.
Laszlo is soon found guilty by an off-screen kangaroo court and given the merciful sentence of being left at sea in lieu of an execution. He's seen off by his "What in the name of Tetsuya Nomura is that outfit?" I mean, I saw him wearing it on the cover, but just... wow. It looks so much worse in-game. Cliché headband, crop top vest, tiny chest piece that barely covers his chest, John Stockton shorts, and all of this atop a short-sleeve version of a women's wrestling singlet. I realized that Final Fantasy was the gold standard everyone was trying to catch up with, but they didn't need to rip off Tetsuya Nomura's god-awful fashion sense. And that's coming from a guy who once wrestled in a magenta kilt and My Little Pony meme t-shirt. No, I don't know why I thought that look worked, shut up. Back on topic, Laszlo says his goodbyes with the two friends he didn't bring along with him earlier in the game before being taken out to sea and left to drift in a small rowboat.
If fortune favors you, it's possible you may be picked up by a passing ship. Commander Glenn trusted you. I don't understand why it had to come to this. Was that trust misplaced? What was it? Fare thee well.
Do you know someone that owns a gun or a knife?
However, it turns out that he's not alone on the boat, as the pair he did bring along earlier in the game decided to stow away, out of frame, to help their falsely accused buddy. We also get one more stowaway in the form of a Catman in a dapper suit. I've known Chipu for less than a minute, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone on this boat and then myself. After some aimless sailing around, our heroes are picked up by two admirals of the Kuluk Empire. Yet their rescue is short-lived as Kuluk is in the middle of planning their conquest of the islands. Caught eavesdropping on the admirals, the three former knights and more importantly Chipu, escape by the skin of their teeth after the bishy Admiral Troy, even his name makes him seem like he belongs in a boy band, gets bored and dismisses them as not posing a real threat. But if it were you in Troy's shoes, would you look at this freak of nature and fashion and ever think he's going to single-handedly unite the islands you're planning to invade? Or that he possessed the Rune of Punishment that you've been searching for? More on that second thing later. Castaway yet again, and this time including a reenactment of the Tom Hanks classic Castaway for good measure, though I don't recall Tom Hanks having to fight a giant enemy crab.
So here's this giant enemy crab.
It's an older code, sir, but it checks out.
Once this horrific incident of terror is over, they're lucky enough to be picked up by another passing ship, this time belonging to the Kingdom of Obel. You can tell Obel isn't evil because this ship is captained by a pretty girl, and pretty girls are never evil.
I'm going to enjoy killing you, Arthur Pendragon.
I said pretty, not smoking hot. Flair here also turns out to be the princess of Obel, and once she spots the rune on Laszlo's hand, invites them to meet her father.
Sorry to have misled you. I'm Linu and Kuldus, King of Obel. Pleasure to meet you.
What? This guy is the king?
I'm beginning to think that Junko Kawano was taking the piss with some of these designs. And the fact that he otherwise acts like a typical wizened fantasy king only adds to the weirdness. This is where we finally get a full explanation about the rune that attached itself to Laszlo. After completing this dungeon a mere hop, skip, and a jump away from the royal palace, of course. Seems like a hazard to have something like that so close, but I'm not wearing the royal jorts, so it's none of my business. It turns out that Laszlo is afflicted with the Rune of Punishment, one of the 27 true runes. However, unlike the true runes we've seen thus far, the Rune of Punishment is a parasitic one which grants power at the cost of its host's life force. Once it's drained the last drop from its current host, the Rune of Punishment moves on to the nearest available host. The obvious solution would be to never use the rune so that no one else has to be cursed. But there's a couple problems with that. Namely that an imperialist power is about to start an invasion of Laszlo's homeland, and said imperialist power wants to get its grubby mitts on the Rune of Punishment with the help of the Krei Trading Company. Remember Ramada? That bald Gendo Akari looking fuck that Laszlo and Snow escorted back near the beginning? Krei would be his employers, and that ambush by Brando was supposed to deliver the Rune of Punishment into Kuluk's hands. Not that his boss, Graham Krei, let Ramada or his ninja bodyguards know that taking the rune would involve one of them being cursed for life with it. Once he does learn this, in the midst of Kuluk's invasion of Obel no less, Ramada is quick to switch sides and bring along two of the most useful mid-game party members. Still, the battle turns against Obel and King Shaka Bra, forcing him to resort to desperate measures and flee his kingdom in the giant ship hidden in the cliffside that you've been using as an improvised headquarters to enlist the aid of the other islands against Kuluk's might.
Everybody got that?
Since Laszlo is the hero of the story, though, he's the one who gets to be captain on this voyage. And with that nearly 3,000-word recap, we finally enter into the main chunk of any Suikoden game. Traveling around the map, completing mini story arcs to gain new allies against the bad guys, and getting every one of the 108 Stars of Destiny. One of which essentially being a pirate queen version of Valeria voiced by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn.
Oh?
Well, if you want to fight for justice, you better be sure you know who is actually an enemy.
Major, are you there?
Yeah, I heard you.
What is it with this game and having both the dumbest characters and the best characters? It's in this mid-game where Suikoden 4's flaws become apparent. Up to this point, while nothing was blowing me away, I wasn't finding much to gripe about. In comparison to the last game, 4 was opening up at a lightning-quick pace, and it seemed as if I was going to have a big world to sail around and explore similar to Skies of Arcadia. Then I started traveling between islands and... Hang on, gotta deal with this encounter.
A few moments later.
Okay, so as I was saying, I began my recruiting drive across the islands and... again?
A few minutes later.
Once again, as I was trying to... Are you fucking with me? When I said I was hoping for something like Skies of Arcadia, I didn't mean the encounter rate. This is ridiculous. And it's not like you'll encounter a wide variety of creatures on the high seas. Not counting mini-boss types, there's maybe 6 or 7 different groups of enemies across the whole ocean. Which would be fine if we were talking about a game where water makes up maybe a fourth of the whole map, but Suikoden 4 has a map that feels about as big as Wind Waker with roughly half the number of islands, if that. You'll be spending long stretches of this game on your ship just sailing around and running into encounter after encounter every few nautical inches. Your best option is to make a beeline for Ney Island the second you get the ship so you can recruit Vicky. You'll still have to sail manually to each island once, but afterwards you'll be able to hop between them at a moment's notice. Even if the story randomly dictates that you have to go to an island you've already been to manually again, this way you'll at least have a nearby island to start from instead of making your way across empty ocean. Yeah, you can speed up travel by holding down R1, in fact it's essential that you do so, but it still takes forever. Keep in mind that when I refer to this as empty ocean, I mean empty ocean. Aside from the islands themselves, there is nothing here. No perilous waters, no sunken treasure, no tales of a secret or curse of Monkey Island requiring you to escape from LeChuck's revenge before making a triumphant return.
Look, the point I'm trying to make is nobody is born cool. Except, of course.
There aren't even other ships to run into outside of the story. It's not as if I expected Suikoden 4 to go full Golden Age of Sail Sim, as awesome as that would have been, but having absolutely nothing to do besides sail to my next destination makes this feel as padded as Suikoden 3's constant backtracking. Let's go back to Sid Meier's Pirates for a second. Sailing against the wind sucks live-action squirrel with big balls as big balls, but look at all the ships nearby, the clouds and storms passing overhead, the reefs to avoid. It's not only important for me to keep an eye out while I sail along like an old man out for a Sunday drive, but there's also always something for me to do if I need to break up the monotony of my long journey. In comparison, Suikoden 4's world is the opposite yet equally dull version of a Ubisoft open world. It isn't fun to explore, there's no landmarks to help you find your way without constantly consulting the sea chart, the world is emptier than a crypto investor's skull, and the constant encounters just exacerbate these problems. Oh, and that sea chart you consult has Fog of War to it for some reason. This might have made sense if I was an explorer new to these waters, but Laszlo grew up here. Even if he doesn't have a decent sea chart on hand, surely someone on this ship would. And the islands themselves are positively tiny. Few of them have more than maybe 5 areas, and dungeons are so scarce that there are islands with random encounters in town.
My equilibrium destabilized.
I can't recall if I've ever seen such a thing in an RPG before. All I'm trying to do is get to the town square to recruit Mizuki over there, and suddenly I'm attacked by giant wasps. Now you might assume like I did at first this is some scripted event leading to someone in charge showing up afterwards to talk about how the wildlife has been acting crazy lately or something to that effect. But no, there's just an active combat zone right outside the mayor's house for no reason whatsoever. Are you starting to see yet why I believe this game was rushed? That point also plays into a theory I have for why there are only 4 party slots as opposed to 6. The PlayStation 2 itself shouldn't have a problem with displaying that many characters during battle. The fact that Suikoden 5, which came out even faster than 4 did, was able to do so proves that. But suppose an inexperienced team was tasked with building a return-to-form Suikoden in roughly 2 years, when their only experience developing a PS2 game before was with an adventure title. It's very likely that they wouldn't be entirely sure how far they could push the hardware in this context, particularly when shifting away from the stylized character models of 3. Now, if I were in that position and the battles were tanking the frame rate, I could see myself agreeing with dropping the max party to 4 if our first priority was getting this released on time. Of course, this is all guesswork on my part, influenced by the number of games that I've played over the years that I know to have been rushed. It's entirely possible that they were given everything they needed to succeed, and this was truly all they could do. But this is Konami we're talking about. If there's a major Japanese game studio that better embodies the concept of a black company, then that's fucking terrifying. They did think to include an almost good alternative to the old party size. Once you escape Obel in your swanky new ship, you'll be granted the ability to make 2 additional parties, enabling you to swap between them on the fly during battles. At sea. And only at sea. So instead of stumbling across a way to actually double the number of active characters, I found a feature that I use so rarely I frequently forgot about it entirely. As I said, almost a good alternative. Now the battles themselves are fine. We're back to the general style and rhythm of the first 2 games, except we're down 2 roster spots. Though the meta has shifted and my prior strategy of
ruthless aggression
isn't as effective this go around, with powerful magic now needing to be relied on more often to clear even some standard encounters. Don't quote me on it, but methinks this change had something to do with a certain recurring sorceress being promoted to playable for the first time. I swear, Jean has the same outfit and bust size progression as Ivy from Soul Calibur. Unite attacks have returned to the usefulness they once possessed thanks to Suikoden 4, but with a caveat. You have to unlock them by fighting 10 battles with those specific characters in your party. On top of that, these attacks can achieve level 2 after 20 more battles, and level 3 after another 30. This is an unnecessary change that seems to only be present to justify the insane encounter rate. Not to mention how this discourages you from trying out too many different party members unless you feel like doing tons of grinding. I've got the setup that works for me. What incentive is there for me to switch now and lose access to the Unite attack, or attacks, that I already built up? On the more positive side of things, the number of mini-games have increased big time. They've increased to the point that I actually missed a few of them like Battle Tops. Now in my defense, I was distracted by trying to catch these pesky Misas. This isn't exactly a great minigame, but the sheer absurdity of the whole thing made the experience amusing for me. I certainly had more fun with it than I did treasure hunting. Walking around real slow in the area you think the map might be pointing to while waiting for the dowsing rods to react is already annoying. Having to do it while random encounters still trigger, and I can't just look up where to dig because the locations are randomized? No thank you. Gambling is back in force too, and these minigames are roughly on the same level as their Suikoden 1 and 2 equivalents. I suck at most of them, but that's par for the course. Except for Rita Pawn. I'm so bad at Mahjong that saying I suck can't even begin to describe it. So anyways, onto the presentation. Nightmare-inducing main character aside, I like the switch to a less stylized look to the character models. For me at least, these pair far better with the portrait art than Suikoden 3's models did. It's not perfect, there's still some, for lack of a better word, character, lost in the transition from 2D to 3D, but it's an improvement. The biggest weakness to Suikoden 4's aesthetic is how little it stands out from your typical fantasy RPG. For all the potential of setting your game on the open ocean with all manner of different cultures between the islands, basically everywhere looks like a medieval Western European fantasy town. Except for Rosaril, which looks more Mediterranean, and the Ney Kobolds village, which gets to be all quirked up on a Tuesday because its citizens are kitties. Kittizens. Oh, and the resort island gets to have a slight Pacific Islander vibe because that's where people with money vacation. Why Suikoden 4 doesn't lean more into its obvious swashbuckling influences for a more Caribbean look to the island nations, I'll never know. Or maybe have cues from some Polynesian or Melanesian architecture. Anything to make this stand out from the mainland. I mean, standard forest elves? Why even set the game on the ocean if you aren't going to have fun with it at times like this? The Elder Scrolls has aquatic elves who use snake magic to control enormous sea serpents. How is it that the Elder Scrolls has such rich lore and Bethesda still manages to pick the least interesting parts of it for their mainline games? As we all ponder that riddle for the ages, let's briefly discuss Suikoden 4's soundtrack. For starters, the intro song is, definitely a vibe. The song itself is catchy, but it feels less like I'm heading off on a grand adventure across the sea and more like I'm pulling into Havana to report to the governor and flirt with his hot daughter. I'm no musical theorist, I can't tell an oboe from an elbow.
Elbow. More bad humor.
But opening themes for RPGs should have a greater sense of mystery or scale to them. Failing that, they should at least make for a cool music video like Kingdom Hearts. I'm not fond of Kingdom Hearts, but even I think Simple and Clean is amazing. In fact, I would go so far as to say it rivals Voices by Akino Arai in brilliance. Except Voices got to be the centerpiece of the pinnacle of the mecha genre, Macross Plus, while Hikaru Utada's opus wound up trapped on Mr. Nomura's Wild Ride. But I should get back on topic before I start complaining about Kingdom Hearts.
But we're just starting to connect.
I've mentioned before that I don't always notice the music when I'm playing a game, and while I've really tried to correct that since starting these videos, that problem still crops up from time to time. This being one of those times. Which surprises me, seeing as how Michiru Yamane and Masahiko Kimura returned from Suikoden 3 to do 4's soundtrack, and I quite liked their work in the last game. The addition of Norikazu Miura as the third member of the music team this time around shouldn't have thrown things off that much. I mean, he would later go on to do the soundtrack for Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, so it's not as if Miura isn't talented. Yet when I went to write this script, I couldn't even remember the battle music. Getting once and future Castlevania sound team members worked out so well last time, but I guess even Castlevania composers have their off days.
Blasphemy!
And of course I can't forget about the voice acting.
The cat is being chased by the master. The cat can't win. The cat probably won't be able to come back. The cat tried to kill the master's child, which made the master mad. The master is always angry. I hate it. The master is up there. I want you to get rid of the master for me. Once you do, the cat will come back too. And then, the thing I hate will be gone. Okay?
As you might expect from a PS2 era game, we've got plenty of anime dub regulars here. Just among Laszlo's friends, we've got Wendy Lee, Doug Airholtz, Michelle Ruff, and Liam O'Brien.
What was that just now?
Then there's Kim Strauss, Kari Walgren, Dave Wittenberg, the previously mentioned Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, Richard Cancino, you get the idea. Point is that if you like any of these voice actors, you won't mind the performances here for the most part. There are some awkward ones here and there, and I'd hardly call it anyone's best performance.
Oh, it's Chipu, the Nakeable that works in town.
You didn't have to go that far. How dare you leave me out of the loop? I think that's the coolest thing you've ever done to me!
Now, chin up.
Overall, though, I'd give this dub a passing grade.
You pass! You pass!
I suppose that just leaves us with the story, which means I'll have to break out the incessant comparisons with Suikoden 3 one last time, as these two games are truly perfect foils of each other with their narratives. Put simply, they're both stories with tons of potential that let me down for opposite reasons. Suikoden 3 has an amazing initial hook with the staff pedigree to convince you that it can follow through on its promise of an unflinching look at the meaninglessness of war, only to fall apart at the end by going too cosmic with its finale. It's a free climb up Grand Teton that loses its grip and suffers a brutal fall back to Earth. Meanwhile, Suikoden 4 is more akin to a stroll up a gentle incline at the start, before settling into a comfortable stroll across the plains framed by the distant Tetons. Spoilers from here on out. If you don't want the rest of Suikoden 4's plot and its ending spoiled for you, skip ahead to my conclusion here. Forgiveness and punishment are at the core of Suikoden 4's themes. The wielder of the Rune of Punishment is granted the power to visit righteous vengeance upon those who have wronged the wielder, but at the eventual cost of their life, symbolizing how the pursuit of punishment above all else slowly strips away the life from us all. The only way for Laszlo to break this miserable cycle is to show compassion and mercy to even the worst of his enemies, exemplified in the recruitment of Snow being the last step needed to achieve the good ending. By the time you meet him again, Snow and his father are revealed to have sold out their own people to Kuluk in exchange for power. Unlike his corrupt father, though, Snow is ignorant of how much the people around him view this as a betrayal. Rationalizing it as the only way to protect Razoril, he's baffled by the hostility of the people he thinks should see him as a hero. Even more so than cowardice, I view Snow's fundamental flaw as the terrible combo of a desperate craving for approval and a stubborn refusal to ever reflect on his own mistakes. Granted, being repeatedly decked by his commanding officer, while totally deserved and funny as hell, isn't likely to impart the right lesson. Instead, Snow seems to always perceive his mistake as having been that he didn't do the same thing as Laszlo, which is technically correct, but he always fails to contextualize Laszlo's decisions. Take Snow fleeing from his first battle, thus forcing Laszlo to take command and salvage the situation. From everyone else's perspective, Laszlo is simply doing what Snow should have done and lead the defense of the ship they were escorting. However, Snow winds up viewing it as his friend blindly charging into danger and being praised for it. Thus, his idea to redeem himself among the other knights being a blind charge after a retreating enemy. When you take a step back and think about it, Snow is just a pitiful wretch who's been failed by every adult in his life. Does this excuse any of his actions? Of course not. But it makes it harder and harder to enjoy him suffering the consequences of his actions when he's about as threatening as an infant. Several times the player has Snow at their mercy, each time he's grown more desperately pathetic than before, and has the opportunity to execute him for his crimes. Other characters rightfully point out that Snow has done absolutely nothing to warrant forgiveness, while Snow himself seems resigned to death. Yet that's the entire point of forgiveness. There's no true way to earn it. Forgiveness is offered when the person who has been wronged wishes to offer it. And eventually, it's Laszlo's undeserved kindness towards Snow which saves him from himself. This final mercy is what reveals a hidden aspect of the Rune of Punishment, its forgiveness phase. Having so thoroughly rejected using the rune for anything other than selfless reasons and showing mercy to possibly the least deserving person in his life, Laszlo is no longer burdened by a cost to his life force when he uses the rune. This not only removes the health penalty when using Rune of Punishment spells, but is also the only way for Laszlo to survive the ending. Speaking of that ending, you'll notice that nowhere in that diatribe did I bother to talk much about Kuluk, their admirals, or the Krei Trading Company. That's because they don't factor all that much into the story as characters themselves. They're more like humanoid plot devices there to advance the story when needed. Which is a real shame because several of them could have made for great antagonists. Despite Troy and Colton both possessing hints of classic Suikoden anti-villains following orders out of loyalty to their homeland in spite of their own misgivings, beyond your early game encounter with them and brief cutaways to strategy sessions,
Gentlemen,
they're given remarkably little characterization. Then we have Helmut, who gets hardly any screen time at all before you fight his fleet and potentially recruit him. He winds up so forgettable that I didn't even remember he was Colton's son until I had to look up his name while writing this script. But hey, at least he has a name, unlike the governor. Brilliant choice not even giving a name to the guy who initially appears to be the big bad, by the way. It makes him immeasurably memorable. As for the actual big bad, Graham Krei, whose reveal as the real mastermind is about as shocking as learning that naturally running water isn't hot,
It's not hot!
he's given the surprisingly sympathetic backstory of having once been a promising strategist in the Scarlet Moon Empire who lost his young son to the Rune of Punishment when the boy used the rune to protect their village. Unfortunately, the rune went out of control and destroyed the town as well as those attacking it, leaving Krei as the only survivor and the next bearer of the rune. Driven to madness by the trauma of it all, he hunted down and killed all of the nobles responsible. Eventually, Krei was forced to cut his own arm off to sever the connection when the rune nearly went out of control again, thus explaining how a previous bearer could still be alive. All in all, a good, possibly even great backstory that adds some seriously needed depth to any of the villains in Suikoden 4. It's just too bad that this all comes out right near the end when it's far too late for it to matter and for the focus of the conflict to be more on him and his mentor Eleanor, the obligatory Silverberg family member of 4. I get that they have a more personal connection, but it takes a lot of air out of the final battle when this is the first time Laszlo and Krei have even been in the same room as each other. Then after you beat him, he summons a giant enemy tree to serve as the actual final boss.
Right, yeah, of course.
I've read that this gets foreshadowed in the backstory, but I clearly missed it because this fight came right the hell out of nowhere for me. Now the fight itself is pretty cool and suitably hard for a final boss, but am I alone in thinking this design doesn't suit the last great hurdle for our heroes to overcome? I love Venusaur as much as the next kid who grew up on Gen 1 Pokemon, but I don't think that it, or its non-union coniferous equivalent, have that proper final boss cred.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Either way, I beat it and, oh right, Troy's still alive. Again, this duel would have more gravitas to it had Troy been a more prominent part of the story. Not to mention that his defiant act of going down with his ship rather than accept Laszlo's mercy, perhaps holding himself accountable for going along with this war in the first place, gets undermined by him realizing at the last minute that Laszlo is the same guy he let go right before the war kicked off.
The last horse finally crosses the finish line.
Now maybe if Laszlo looked a bit more nondescript, this would have worked. However, someone as supposedly smart as Troy failing to connect the dots until right before his death kinda makes him look like a bigger dumbass than Snow. But this is yet another fake-out ending as the fortress Kuluk have been using goes up in a massive explosion that threatens to take out our hero's ship, and Laszlo is forced to use the full strength of the Rune of Punishment in order to save everyone. From here, the normal and good endings play out roughly the same, with everyone besides Laszlo celebrating their victory and the announcement of the official formation of the island nations as a single country. They really should have workshopped that name, though. Then, if you've gotten the good ending, it cuts to Laszlo waking up on a rowboat and spotting a passing ship, in a parallel to when Princess Flare rescued him and his friends early on. Being a sucker for bookends like this, I approve. I just wish I could approve of the rest of the story half as much. I can't exactly say that I was disappointed by Suikoden 4, as you need to have expectations in the first place before you can be let down. At the same time, I can't exactly say that the experience drove me up the wall by the end like the third game did, because Suikoden 4 never seems to try and be more than the acceptable RPG it is. It's what you get when a developer has a strict timetable and no time for polish. Again though, I could be completely off base, but I highly doubt it. For one, I adore janky games. You ever wonder who the hell buys things like Etrom 20th Anniversary Edition off of Steam? Yo. I know ambitiously busted games, and Suikoden 4 is not it. The fact that both Suikoden Tactics and Suikoden 5 were done by roughly the same team and received a warmer welcome from most critics and fans than Suikoden 4 did, further confirms to me that they were perfectly capable of more. As for whether I'd recommend Suikoden 4 to anyone, well, I certainly wouldn't ever recommend it as your first Suikoden game. But let's say for the sake of argument that you're hankering for more PS2 RPGs and don't care about what order you play the series in. In that case, speaking strictly from my own experiences and in no particular order, Disgaea Hour of Darkness, Rogue Galaxy, Colosseum Road to Freedom, Dark Cloud, Tales of the Abyss, Makai Kingdom, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, Dragon Quest VIII, Disgaea 2 Cursed Memories, Final Fantasy XII, Shin Megami Tensei Persona 3, Monster Rancher 4, MS Saga A New Dawn, Dark Cloud 2/Dark Chronicle, Soul Nomad and the World Eaters, Shadow Hearts, Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4, Phantom Brave, Ys the Ark of I Can't Pronounce That, Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga, Romancing Saga, La Pucelle Tactics, Art and Elico Melody of Elernia, Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner Raido Kuzunoha vs. the Soulless Army, and last but not least, Atelier Iris Eternal Mana. If you've played all of those games as well as the ones the folks in the comments are mad that I didn't mention in my list because they didn't realize that I can only recommend games which I've played, and if after all of those games you're still desperate for more PS2 RPGs, then go for it, Slugger. As for everyone else, only if you're a fan of the series intent on playing every game. There are flat out too many great RPGs on this console to say that Suikoden 4 was unfairly overlooked. That's all for this one, but we're not done with sequels just yet as we open the spooky month of October with a look at the second game in the Gabriel Knight series, The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery.
Guten Abend.
Guten, how are you? Is this the castle of the Schotten Joggers here?
I'll see you then.
Astonished gasp! That jocular fiberglass mascot spoke!
Oh yeah, like that's the weirdest thing we've seen today.